The stars in this sector of space were old and weary. They burned with a dull orange light that made everything around them seem ancient and forgotten. This was the edge of known space, where the Viori did not bother to send their ships. There was nothing here worth finding. Or at least, that is what they had always believed. Senior Analyst Kitaran stood on the observation deck of his research vessel, the Infinite Exploration. His multifaceted eyes reflected the distant stars as he peered into the darkness ahead. Behind him, the bridge was filled with the familiar sounds of his crew, soft clicks and chirps. The Viori were an insectoid race, tall and thin, with chitinous shells that shimmered like polished metal. They had roamed the reaches of space for over 4,000 years. They had seen much. They had catalogued thousands of species. They believed they understood the galaxy. They were wrong. The senior analyst called for Ellet, his lead researcher. She approached with the caution of one carrying important news. Our long-range sensors have detected something unusual. Kitaran turned his triangular head toward her. Define unusual. A ship, drifting without power, approximately 2 light minutes from our current position. Ellet paused, and her antennae twitched nervously. Its design does not match any entry in our databases. That caught Kitaran's attention. The Viori databases contained information on every spacefaring species in the known galaxy. Every ship design, every weapon system, every technology had been recorded and analyzed over thousands of years. That something did not match any known model was almost impossible. "Show me!" he commanded. The main display flickered to life, and Kitaran felt his hearts beat faster. The ship on the screen was unlike anything he had ever seen before. It was angular and harsh, with rigid lines and flat surfaces. In its design, there was no grace, no flowing curves, no artistic elements. It looked as though it had been built by someone who did not care for beauty, but thought exclusively of function. The ship was large, about 300 meters in length. Its hull was covered in thick plates that seemed almost primitive. Strange pipes and structures protruded from the surface at odd angles. Burn marks and impact craters covered most of the exterior, telling a story of a brutal collision. "What happened to it?" Kitaran asked softly. "Unknown. There are signs of weapon damage all over the hull. Whatever attacked this ship, it was very thorough." Elett manipulated the display, zooming in on specific sections. "But senior analyst, look at this. Despite the damage, the structural integrity seems largely preserved. This ship survived whatever battle it was in." Kitaran studied the image more closely. He saw places where whole sections of the outer hull had been torn away, exposing layers of material beneath. Yet, the ship had not fallen apart. It had endured punishment that would have destroyed most of the vessels he knew. "Can you identify any markings? Any indication of origin?" Ellet nodded and amplified the image further. On the side of the vessel, partially obscured by battle damage, were symbols in an unfamiliar language. Below, in a different style, were words the translator could recognize. "USS Perseverance," Ellet read aloud. "Earth, Navy Command." Silence fell upon the bridge. Every Viori present knew that name. Earth. A small planet in a distant arm of the galaxy, home to a species that had only recently discovered faster-than-light travel, humans as they called themselves. The collective had received reports on them for the last 50 years, but they were never considered important enough for direct contact. The reports described them as primitive but ambitious. They had spread rapidly once they left their home world, establishing colonies on nearby planets and moons. They were social creatures, emotional and unpredictable. The collective classified them as a minor species, worthy of observation but not interaction. Now, one of their ships was drifting dead in deep space, and Kitaran felt a strange chill run across his carapace. "Has anyone else detected this vessel?" he asked. "No," Elett replied. "It appears we are the only collective ship in this sector." Kitaran made his decision. "Approach quickly. We will conduct a full analysis. This is a chance to learn more about these humans without the complications of direct contact." The Infinite Exploration moved through the darkness toward the drifting ship. As they approached, Kitaran saw more details of the strange vessel. Up close, it looked even rougher. The hull plating was thick, far thicker than Viori standards required. Weapon systems protruded from multiple points across the surface. Their barrels were dark and cold, but still formidable. Senior Analyst, one of the sensor technicians, said, "I am recording no signs of life on board the vessel. However, there is residual energy in some of the internal systems. The ship is not entirely dead." "Interesting. Prepare a boarding party. I will lead the investigation personally. Elet's antennae pressed against her head in concern. Is that wise? We know nothing about this species or their technology, which is exactly why I must see everything with my own eyes. Kitaran was already moving toward the equipment lockers. Select your best researchers. We may only have one chance to study this ship before others learn of its existence. The boarding party consisted of 12 Viori. Each was in a protective suit designed for hostile environments. They crossed the gap between ships on a small shuttle, landing on the hull of the human vessel next to what appeared to be an airlock. Kitaran was the first to step onto the alien metal. Under his feet, it felt different, somehow heavier. The alloy was unfamiliar, and his suit's sensors struggled to identify its exact composition. Multiple metallic layers, Elet reported, scanning the hull beneath them. Iron, carbon, tungsten, and several other elements in unusual combinations. It is not one material. They have fused different metals together. For what purpose, I cannot say yet. Perhaps structural integrity or... She paused, initiating additional scans. Senior Analyst, I believe this is multi-layered armor of different types, each designed to stop different kinds of attacks. Kitaran considered this. Viori ships used energy shields for protection, invisible barriers that deflected incoming fire. Physical armor was considered obsolete, a relic of ancient times before shield technology was perfected. And yet, here was a ship covered in layers of physical protection. Primitive, one of the researchers commented. Perhaps they have not developed full shield technology, Kitaran replied, but he was not sure. Something in the design seemed intentional, not merely primitive. They found the airlock and managed to interface with its controls. Human systems were surprisingly compatible with Viori technology, using similar principles of engineering and electrical design. The outer door groaned slowly, opening to reveal a small chamber beyond. The atmosphere inside is breathable, Elet reported. A mixture of nitrogen and oxygen, similar to our home planet. Gravity generation is offline, but there is a residual magnetic field, which suggests the use of rotation or artificial gravity systems. They stepped inside, and the outer door closed behind them. Emergency lighting flickered, bathing everything in a dull red glow. The inner door opened, and they stepped onto the human ship. Kitaran's first impression was tightness. The corridors were narrow, built for creatures smaller than the Viori. The ceilings were low, and the walls were cluttered with pipes, cables, and equipment. Everything was functional and exposed. There were no decorative elements, no artistic touches, only metal and mechanisms. They moved slowly through the corridors, documenting everything they saw. The damage from the outside was visible here. Some sections were sealed off by heavy metal doors, and Kitaran saw burn marks on the walls where fires had raged. They were sealing off damaged sections, Elet observed. Compartmentalization. If one section was breached, they could isolate it and continue to function. A logical approach. Kitaran agreed. But again, he noted how extensive the preparations were. The doors were thick and heavy, designed to withstand colossal force. The seals looked as though they could hold a vacuum for a long time. They found what appeared to be the crew's living quarters. The rooms were small, barely large enough for one human. Each contained a sleeping berth, a storage locker, and a small desk with a computer terminal. Personal belongings were scattered around, left behind by the missing crew. Kitaran picked up a small frame from one of the desks. Inside was a photograph, several humans standing together. They were strange-looking creatures, soft and fleshy, with only 2 eyes and no protective carapace. They seemed fragile, vulnerable. And yet, they had built this ship. They had flown it across the galaxy, and they had survived a battle that left their vessel scarred, but intact. "Where are the bodies?" asked one of the researchers. "If the ship was attacked, where is the crew?" It was a good question. They found no remains, no indication of what had happened to the humans who served on this ship. The vessel seemed abandoned, not destroyed, as if the crew had simply left. They continued deeper into the ship, moving toward what, according to internal signs, was the bridge. The doors here were even heavier than elsewhere, reinforced with extra plating. It took several minutes to bypass the security systems and gain access. The bridge was circular, with multiple stations arranged around a central command chair. The displays on the walls were dark, save for a few emergency indicators. The command chair was empty, but Kitaran saw personal items nearby. A jacket hung on the back. A cup sat on a small table next to it. "They left in a hurry," Elet said. "But there are no signs of panic, no struggle. They simply abandoned it. Kitaran approached the main computer terminal and began attempting to access the ship's logs. The system was partially functional, running on backup power. After a few minutes of work, he managed to retrieve some basic information. This vessel was part of what they call the Third Exploration Fleet, he reported. It was assigned to survey this region of space. There is mention of a battle, but the details are encrypted. I can crack the encryption if given time, perhaps, but look at this. Kitaran highlighted a data section. The ship's log indicates that after the battle, the crew evacuated to another vessel. They left Perseverance because it was too damaged to continue. But they survived. They made it out. The researchers exchanged glances. For a primitive species to survive a battle of such severity, leaving the ship in such a condition, was impressive. And that they successfully evacuated suggested a level of organization and discipline that was unexpected. Senior Analyst called one of the researchers from the other side of the bridge. I found something you need to see. Kitaran walked over to where the researcher stood. He was looking at a display showing the technical specifications of the ship. What Kitaran saw made his blood run cold. Perseverance was not a battleship. It was not a military flagship or a superweapon. According to the specifications, it was classified as a light cruiser, a patrol vessel. It was one of the smallest combat-capable ships in the human fleet. If this battered, heavily armed, incredibly durable ship was their idea of a small ship, then what did their larger vessels look like? We need to analyze everything, Kitaran said quietly. Every system, every weapon, every piece of technology. I want to understand exactly what these humans are capable of. Is that really necessary? Elet asked. They are just a primitive species. They hardly pose a real threat to the collective. Kitaran looked around the bridge. The heavy armor, the reinforced doors, the multitude of backup systems. He thought of the layers of protection on the hull, the cannons he had glimpsed along the outside of the ship. He remembered the photograph of the soft, fragile-looking humans. I am not sure who they are, he admitted, but I intend to find out. Begin full analysis immediately. I want preliminary reports within 6 hours. As his team fanned out across the ship, Kitaran remained on the bridge, staring at the empty command chair. He had spent his entire career studying alien species, trying to understand their technology and psychology. He thought he had seen everything the galaxy had to offer. But something about this ship disturbed him in a way he could not explain. It was not just the primitive technology or the brutal design. It was something deeper that he felt but could not identify. This ship had been built by humans who expected to fight, expected to take damage, expected serious injuries, and to keep going. Every aspect of its design spoke of a species that understood violence at a fundamental level, that had built its entire approach to space travel around the assumption that they would encounter enemies. The Viori had not fought a major war in over 3,000 years. Their conflicts were short and precise, resolved with minimal casualties and quick negotiations. They had forgotten what it meant to face an enemy that would not stop, that would not surrender, that would continue to fight until one side was completely annihilated. Standing in the silence of the abandoned bridge, he began to suspect that humans had never forgotten. He suspected they had never known anything else. And that thought, more than anything else, filled him with a deep and growing dread. The analysis would take days, perhaps weeks. They would study every system, every weapon, every technology they could find. And Kitaran knew with a certainty that surprised him that everything they discovered would change everything the collective believed about its place in the galaxy. Humans were coming. They were already here, exploring, expanding, building their brutal ships and terrible cannons, and the galaxy had no idea what was approaching. But Kitaran was beginning to understand. And understanding, he realized, was the first step toward fear. He turned away from the command chair and got to work. There was much to learn, and he suspected that every discovery would only deepen the cold horror that had taken root in his heart. The stars outside continued to burn with their weary orange light, indifferent to the small drama playing out in the dark. But somewhere out there, on a small blue world orbiting an ordinary yellow star, a species was looking at those same stars with greedy eyes, and they were building more ships. 3 days had passed since the boarding party first stepped onto the human vessel. In that time, Kitaran had slept only a few hours. The secrets of Perseverance consumed all his thoughts, forcing him to work long after his strength had failed. The infinite exploration remained anchored next to the drifting ship. Its own systems were constantly analyzing the data flowing in from the research teams. Every deck of the human vessel had been explored. Every system had been cataloged, and with each new discovery, Kitaran's anxiety grew deeper. He stood now in the main analytical bay of his own ship, surrounded by holographic displays and technical readouts. Ellet stood beside him. Her multifaceted eyes darted between the screens as she processed the incoming information. "Let's start with the hull," Kitaran said, gesturing to bring up the relevant data. "Tell me what we've learned." Ellet touched the controls, and a detailed cross-section of the human ship's outer shell appeared before them. It was far more complex than Kitaran had initially assumed. Layer upon layer. Different materials were stacked upon each other. Each served a specific purpose. "The outermost layer is what the humans call ablative armor," Ellet began. "It is designed to absorb the fire of energy weapons by burning away. As the material evaporates, it carries heat away from the ship. The layer is thick enough to withstand several direct hits before being depleted." Kitaran studied the material specifications. It was crude by Viori standards. Simple compounds that any first-year student could create. But in this design was a brutal efficiency he could not deny. Below the ablative layer, Ellet continued, "we find reactive armor. This layer contains small, explosive charges embedded in the hull. When a projectile strikes the surface, these charges detonate outward, destroying the incoming object before it can penetrate deeper." "They put explosives into their own armor?" one of the younger researchers asked. His voice was full of disbelief. "Yes. The human approach seems to be that controlled damage to their own ship is preferable to uncontrolled damage from enemy weapons." Ellet highlighted the next layer. "Below the reactive armor is a structural matrix of interconnected hexagonal cells. This honeycomb pattern distributes kinetic force over a wide area, preventing any single hit from causing catastrophic failure." Kitaran leaned closer to the display. The engineering was elegant in its simplicity. Each layer solved a different type of threat, and together they formed a defensive system that was surprisingly comprehensive. "There is more," Ellet said. "Below the honeycomb structure, we find radiation-shielded compartments. The walls between sections contain materials specifically designed to block harmful radiation. This suggests that humans expect to work in environments with high levels of radiation. For example, near nuclear detonations." "Precisely," Kitaran muttered. "And finally, the innermost layer is a self-sealing membrane. When the hull is breached, this material expands rapidly, filling the gap and maintaining atmospheric integrity until proper repairs can be made." The display showed the full cross-section. All 5 layers worked together to protect the ship and its crew. Kitaran calculated the total thickness of the armor. It was massive, accounting for a significant portion of the ship's total mass. "This is inefficient," the younger researcher said. "The mass spent on armor could have been used for more weapons or faster engines. A Viori ship of the same size would be twice as fast and carry 3 times the firepower and would be destroyed by one well-placed shot." Kitaran replied quietly. Silence fell over the bay. Everyone present realized what he was implying. Viori ships relied on energy shields for protection in visible barriers that could reflect most attacks. But shields could fail. They could be overloaded or bypassed by specialized weapons. When a Viori shield failed, the ship behind it was virtually defenseless. The human ship had no shields that they could detect. Instead, it had layer upon layer of physical protection, each capable of absorbing damage that would destroy a Viori vessel. "I have calculated the volume of damage this ship could absorb before losing structural integrity," Ellet said. She called up a new display showing the results. "Based on our standard weapon systems, a Viori line cruiser would have to land direct hits in the same spot, 17 hits in the exact same spot to penetrate all 5 layers of armor. That is almost impossible in real combat conditions," Kitaran said. "Correct. Random fire would have to strike the ship hundreds of times to have even a chance of causing critical damage. And during all that time, the human vessel would be returning fire with its own weapons." Kitaran walked slowly around the holographic display, studying the armor from different angles. He had been a scientist for over 200 years. He had analyzed the technologies of dozens of species. He had never seen anything like this. "Why? Who would build a ship this way?" he asked, more to himself than anyone else. "Perhaps they face enemies with very powerful weapons," Ellet suggested. "Enemies that can easily pierce normal types of defense. Perhaps. But there is another possibility." Kitaran stopped and turned to his team. "Perhaps they built this ship expecting to fight enemies just as dangerous as themselves." The implication hung in the air. If humans designed their ships to survive combat against opponents with similar technologies, it meant they expected battles to be brutal and prolonged. It meant they expected to take damage, serious damage, and keep fighting regardless. The Viori approach to war was based on precision. Strike fast, strike accurately, end the battle quickly. Their ships were built for speed and firepower, not for endurance. A typical Viori engagement lasted a few minutes at most. Looking at the human ship, Kitaran began to understand that humans fought very differently. Their battles were not quick surgical strikes. They were grueling contests of attrition, where both sides absorbed colossal punishment until one could no longer continue. "Show me the damage patterns from the battle this ship survived," he ordered. Ellet called up a new display, a map of Perseverance, showing every hit point and area of damage. The image was sobering. The ship had been struck hundreds of times. Whole sections of the outer armor had been stripped away, multiple compartments had been breached. The signs of fires were visible all along the port side. "Based on the damage patterns, we estimate that the engagement lasted approximately 4 hours, Ellet reported. 4 hours, Kitaran repeated. A Viori battle never lasted 4 hours. Most ended in less than 10 minutes. Crew casualties were significant, Ellet continued. Based on the medical logs we recovered, approximately 40% of the crew died or were seriously wounded during the engagement. Yet the ship kept fighting. The humans continued to man their stations, even as their comrades died around them. One of the researchers made a sound of despair. Such losses would be considered a catastrophic defeat. A ship that lost 40% of its crew would surrender immediately to prevent further loss of life. The humans just kept fighting. Did they achieve victory? Kitaran asked. Ellet checked her data. The logs are incomplete, but it appears so. Perseverance destroyed or disabled 3 enemy vessels before being forced to retreat. The crew evacuated to a support ship that arrived after the battle and was retrieved safely. 3 enemy ships. Kitaran tried to imagine a battle where one damaged vessel with nearly half its crew dead or wounded managed to destroy 3 opponents before escaping. That should have been impossible. And yet, the evidence was right in front of him. "I want to understand their internal systems," he said. "How does a ship continue to function after receiving such damage?" Ellet switched to a new set of displays. The human approach to engineering is based on redundancy. Every critical system has several backups. There are 3 separate power generators, each capable of independently powering the entire ship. There are 2 bridge layouts, primary and secondary, connected by hardened communication lines. Life support has 4 independent units scattered throughout the ship, and crew zones are divided into isolated sections, each with its own atmospheric control and supplies. If one section is breached, it can be sealed off without affecting the others. The crew in the remaining sections can continue to work. Kitaran thought about what this meant in practice. A Viori ship was efficient, with integrated and streamlined systems, but if any key component failed, the entire ship was compromised. The human ship was wasteful, carrying multiple versions of every critical system, but it could lose section after section and still remain functional. "They expect to take damage," he said slowly. "Their entire design philosophy is built around the assumption that they will be hit, that systems will fail, that crew members will die, and they plan for it. They build their ships to survive it." "It seems so," Ellet agreed. "But Senior Analyst, this raises a troubling question. What kind of enemies do humans face that require such extensive preparations? What kind of wars do they wage that made such a level of defense necessary?" Kitaran did not answer immediately. He thought about the historical files they had recovered from the ship's database. Most were encrypted, but some basic historical information was available. What he had read there deeply troubled him. Humans had been at war since before they had even discovered fire. Their history was an endless chronicle of conflict. Battle after battle, rooted in the dawn of their civilization. They fought for territory, for resources, for religious beliefs, for political systems. They developed weapons of ever more terrifying power, from simple clubs to nuclear bombs. And all this experience, all this knowledge of violence and destruction, they had channeled into the task of creating ships capable of surviving in space. "I believe," Kitaran said finally, "that though the enemies the humans were preparing to fight are themselves." The room fell into silence again. The researchers looked at each other with expressions of bewilderment and growing anxiety. "Themselves?" Ellet asked. "Look at the design. Look at the weapons we found. Look at the level of preparation for damage and casualties. This is not a ship built to fight primitive aliens or natural hazards. This is a ship built to fight an enemy with equal technology, equal determination, equal willingness to take and inflict damage." Kitaran called up the historical files on the main display. Humans had spent thousands of years at war with one another, nation against nation, ideology against ideology. They had developed these technologies, these tactics, these designs in conflicts against their own kind. The researchers stared at the scrolling text, an endless list of wars, battles, and casualties. The numbers were staggering. Millions dead in single conflicts. Entire cities destroyed. Weapons capable of ending civilization itself. They built ships to survive the fight against each other, Kitaran continued. And now they have brought those ships to the stars. They have brought all that knowledge, all that experience, all that capacity for violence and endurance into the wider galaxy. But surely, now they will become more peaceful, one of the younger researchers said. Hopefully, now that they face alien species, they will cast aside their warlike nature. Kitaran looked at the young researcher with something close to pity. Do you want to see what weapons they brought with them? Do you want to see what tools they developed for waging war? The researcher did not answer. Kitaran turned back to the displays. Continue the analysis. I want full specifications on every system, every weapon, every particle of technology we can find. The collective needs to understand exactly what we are dealing with. As his team returned to their work, Kitaran remained standing before the cross-section of human armor. 5 layers of protection, each designed to absorb different types of damage. Hundreds of hits absorbed. 40% personnel losses. And yet, the ship had kept fighting. He had spent his career believing the Viori way of war was superior, fast, clean, efficient, with minimal casualties on both sides. Wars ended through precision, not through attrition. Now, he wondered, were the Viori simply lucky? Lucky that they had faced enemies who shared their philosophy? Lucky that they had never met a species that viewed war not as a problem to be solved, but as the natural state of existence? Humans were that species. Everything in their technology, their design, philosophy, and their history pointed to the same conclusion. They were a people born in violence, raised in conflict, shaped by endless wars, and they were building more ships. Kitaran thought about the reports he would need to send to the collective. He thought about how to explain what he had found here, on the edge of known space. He thought about the reaction his findings would provoke among the comfortable, peaceful leaders who had never faced a serious military threat. They would not want to believe him. They would dismiss his concerns as exaggeration, his analysis as flawed. They would continue to view humans as a primitive species not worth serious attention. And that, Kitaran realized, might be the most dangerous mistake the collective had ever made. He turned away from the displays and headed for the door. There was still much work to do, still many systems to analyze, still more weapons to catalog. Humans had built their ship to survive the worst the galaxy could throw at them. Now, Kitaran had to understand what damage they could throw in return. The armory of Perseverance was located deep in the belly of the ship, protected by additional layers of armor and blast-proof doors thick enough to stop a small meteorite. It took almost a day of work for Kitaran's team to gain access, hacking through security systems and blocked barriers that seemed designed to prevent entry, even for the crew themselves, without proper authorization. When they finally stepped inside, Kitaran understood why. The chamber was enormous, stretching across 3 decks and occupying nearly a quarter of the ship's internal volume. Racks of missiles lined the walls, hundreds of them. Each rested in its own launch tube. Along the ceiling stretched the magnetic rails of what looked like kinetic launchers. Their barrels extended toward ports in the hull. And in the very center of it all, behind the heaviest doors Kitaran had ever seen, was a storage unit marked with warning symbols in several languages. "Ancient stars," whispered Alet. "This is not a military ship. This is a weapons platform." Kitaran moved slowly through the bay, his multifaceted eyes soaked in every detail. The Viori used almost exclusively energy weapons, clean, efficient, precise. One well-aimed laser could disable an enemy ship with minimal collateral damage. The idea of packing a ship with so much physical weaponry seemed almost barbaric. "Begin the analysis," he ordered. "I want to understand exactly what each of these systems does." The team fanned out. Each researcher took their own section of the armory. Kitaran was the first to approach the kinetic launchers, drawn by their immense size. The rails stretched nearly 50 meters along the length of the ship. Their surfaces were polished to a mirror finish. The senior analyst called for one of the engineers. "I have finished the preliminary scan of the magnetic acceleration system. The results are alarming." Kitaran joined him at a diagnostic terminal connected to the human systems. The data on the screen made his heart skip a beat. These rails accelerate solid metal projectiles to approximately 3% of the speed of light, the engineer explained. The standard ammunition appears to be tungsten rods, each weighing about 50 kilograms. Kitaran performed the calculations in his head. A 50-kilogram object traveling at 3% of light speed carried kinetic energy equivalent to a small nuclear weapon, and by the ammunition storage, he saw that the ship carried hundreds of such projectiles. What is the rate of fire? 1 shot every 4 seconds from each launcher. There are 6 launchers on the ship, 6 launchers firing every 4 seconds. That meant Perseverance could fire approximately 90 projectiles per minute, each carrying enough energy to shatter a small moon. Kitaran felt a coldness spread throughout his body. The targeting system is just as impressive, the engineer continued. They use a combination of radar, LiDAR, and optical tracking to maintain accuracy at extreme distances. The effective range is approximately 3 light seconds. 3 light seconds, almost 1,000,000 kilometers. At that distance, Viori energy weapons would disperse into uselessness. But a solid object, once accelerated, would travel forever until it hit something. "Show me the missiles," Kitaran said. They moved to the racks along the walls. Up close, the missiles were larger than Kitaran had realized. Each was nearly 3 meters long and half a meter in diameter. They were of several varieties, distinguished by colored bands painted on the hulls. "We have identified 4 main types," Alet reported, studying her scanner. The first type, marked with blue bands, are standard high-explosive warheads. They carry about 200 kilograms of chemical explosive and are designed for general use against enemy vessels. 200 kilograms of explosive in 1 missile, Kitaran repeated. "Yes, and the ship carries about 400 of this type." Alet moved to the next rack. The second type, marked with yellow bands, is what humans call cluster munitions. They are designed to separate before impact, releasing dozens of smaller warheads that spread over a wide area. Kitaran inspected one of the missiles with a yellow band. The design was ingenious in its horror. 1 volley could saturate an entire region of space with explosive projectiles, overwhelming point defense systems and ensuring that at least some reached their targets. The third type is more specialized. Alet's voice grew quieter. They are marked with red bands and are called armor-piercing missiles. They carry hardened tips designed to pierce armor and then detonate inside the enemy ship. Inside, Kitaran imagined a missile piercing the hull of a ship, traveling deep into its vitals before exploding. The damage would be catastrophic, destroying critical systems and killing crew members who thought they were protected by layers of metal. And the fourth type, Alet hesitated before answering. The fourth type is marked with black bands. According to the ship's manifest, they carry nuclear warheads. The team went silent. Nuclear weapons were known to the Viori. Of course, they had developed them thousands of years ago during the last major war the Collective had fought, but they had been banned by universal agreement. Their destructive power was deemed too horrific for civilized species. The humans carried them as standard equipment on a patrol vessel. "How many?" Kitaran asked. 48 nuclear missiles. The yield of the warheads varies from 50 kilotons to 2 megatons. Kitaran closed his eyes for a moment. 2 megaton nuclear weapons, delivered by a missile that could pierce armor and explode inside an enemy ship. The thought was almost too horrific to contemplate. "Is there anything else?" he asked, though he was not sure he wanted to hear the answer. "There is." Alet led him to the center of the armory, to the heavily protected vault he had noticed earlier. This area was marked with warning symbols in the human language. Our translator identifies them as indicating extreme danger, and the specific threat is antimatter. Antimatter. The word seemed to echo in the quiet chamber. Every species that developed advanced technology eventually discovered antimatter. It was the most powerful energy source in the universe, releasing colossal energy upon contact with ordinary matter. Most civilizations used it cautiously in tiny amounts for power generation or scientific research. The security locks on the vault were the most advanced on the ship. It took the team nearly 2 hours to crack them. When the doors finally opened, Kitaran stepped inside and found himself in a small room dominated by a single massive container. "It is a magnetic confinement vessel," Alet explained. "It uses powerful electromagnetic fields to hold the antimatter in suspension without it touching the walls. The power source is independent of the ship's main systems, with several backups." "How much antimatter is stored here?" Alet verified with her scanner. "Approximately 200 grams. 200 grams. It didn't sound like much, but Kitaran knew better. 200 grams of antimatter upon contact with ordinary matter would produce an explosion equivalent to approximately 8 megatons of nuclear explosive. 8 million tons of destructive power contained in a space barely larger than a human fist. What is its purpose? Kitaran asked. It is the ship's power source. No, wait. The ship uses a fusion reactor to generate power. Elet pointed to a set of loading mechanisms attached to the container. This antimatter is intended only for use as a weapon. According to the documentation, it can be loaded into specialized warheads for deployment against heavily fortified targets. Used as a weapon, humans built bombs out of antimatter. They had done what no other species in the known galaxy dared to do. They had taken the most destructive force in the universe and turned it into a weapon of war. The documentation includes targeting priorities for antimatter weapons, Elet continued. Her voice was barely a whisper. Planetary defense systems, space stations, enemy fleet concentrations. She paused. Her antennae trembled, and planetary surfaces. In cases of what humans call strategic necessity. Kitaran felt the floor fall away from beneath his feet. Planetary surfaces. Humans had built weapons capable of destroying entire worlds, and they had done so consciously, with full understanding of what they were creating. He thought about his home planet, a beautiful world of blue oceans and green forests where billions of Viori lived peaceful lives. He thought about how one human ship, carrying only 200 grams of antimatter, could turn that world into radioactive ash. And this was a patrol ship, a small ship. How much antimatter did their larger vessels carry? I need to see the fire control systems, Kitaran said. I need to understand how this weapon is targeted and deployed. They left the antimatter vault and headed to the Weapon Control Center, a small room adjacent to the secondary bridge. Multiple stations lined the walls. Each was dedicated to a specific weapon system. The crew that served here was responsible for unleashing destruction on a scale that made Kitaran's mind reel. He accessed one of the terminals and began browsing the targeting protocols. What he found there did not ease his fears. Human weapon systems were designed for flexibility. They could strike targets at various distances, using different weapons for different situations. Kinetic launchers were the primary long-range weapon, capable of engaging enemies before they closed to energy weapon range. Missiles provided mid-range capability with various types of warheads, allowing for tactical adaptation. Nuclear weapons were reserved for heavily armored targets or fleet actions, and antimatter was held in reserve for targets that had to be destroyed at any cost. There were no usage restrictions, no protocols requiring authorization from distant commanders or civilian leaders. The ship's captain had full authority to deploy any weapon from the arsenal, including antimatter bombs, based solely on their own judgment. They trust individual commanders with such power, Kitaran said. One person can decide to use a weapon that can destroy a planet. Human command structure appears to emphasize individual initiative, Elet replied. Their documentation emphasizes the importance of quick decision-making in combat situations. They do not wait for permission. Kitaran thought about Viori military doctrine, the layers of command authority, the committees and councils that had to approve any major action. Sometimes it took days to reach a decision on deploying forces. Humans could destroy a world in seconds if they chose to. Show me the targeting data from their last battle, he ordered. Elet called up the relevant files. The display showed the engagement from the perspective of Perseverance, a reconstruction based on sensor logs and weapon data. 3 enemy ships of unknown design had attacked the human vessel in an ambush. The battle had lasted over 4 hours, exactly as previous reports indicated. What struck Kitaran was the efficiency of the human response. Within seconds of the first attack, weapon systems came online and began returning fire. The kinetic launchers immediately targeted the largest enemy vessel, pounding it with projectile after projectile, while missiles were launched at the smaller ships. The humans did not try to run. They did not try to negotiate. They recognized the threat and responded with overwhelming violence, using every weapon at their disposal to destroy their attackers. The enemy ships fought back, of course. Perseverance sustained colossal damage, as evidenced by the scars all over its hull. But the humans kept fighting. Their weapon systems remained functional, even as entire sections of the ship burned around them. In the end, all 3 enemy vessels were destroyed. Perseverance survived, barely, and limped away to meet reinforcements. And somewhere in the vast database of human military records, this engagement was likely classified as routine. They are predators, Kitaran said suddenly. Elet turned to look at him. Senior Analyst, I have been trying to understand the human approach to war, and finally I see it. They are predators. They do not fight to protect themselves or achieve limited goals. They fight to kill. He pointed to the armory around them. Look at these systems. They are not designed to disable enemy ships or force them to surrender. They are designed to destroy the enemy as quickly and thoroughly as possible. Is that not the goal of any weapon? No. Kitaran shook his head. Viori weapons are designed to end conflicts, not to maximize destruction. We aim for engines to prevent escape, for weapons to prevent return fire, for communication systems to force negotiation. We use the minimum force necessary to achieve our goals. He pointed to the nuclear missiles. Humans use the maximum force available. They don't want to disable their enemies. They want to destroy them completely so thoroughly that they can never pose a threat again. This was a fundamentally different approach to conflict. Viori fought to resolve disputes. Humans fought to eliminate threats. And anyone who threatened a human ship became a target for every terrible weapon in their arsenal. What will we tell the collective? Illet asked quietly. Kitaran thought about the question carefully. The collective's military was based on principles that had served them well for millennia. Speed, precision, minimal losses. Their ships were fast and accurate. Their tactics were honed by centuries of experience. But they had never faced an enemy like this. An enemy that could absorb colossal punishment and keep fighting. An enemy that carried enough firepower to destroy entire fleets. An enemy that viewed war not as a last resort, but as a natural state of existence. We will tell them the truth, Kitaran said finally. We will tell them that humans are the most dangerous species we have ever encountered. We will tell them that every assumption we have made about war might be wrong. And we will tell them that if we ever face these beings, we must win quickly and decisively, because if we don't, he looked around at the missiles, the launchers, the armored vault that held enough destructive power to sterilize a star system. If we don't, they will destroy us completely. They won't stop, they won't negotiate, they won't show mercy. They will fight until we are dead. Or they are, because that is what they do. That is what they have always done, and they have become very, very good at it. The team packed up their equipment in silence. They had seen enough in the armory. They had seen more than enough. Now Kitaran had to understand the beings who had built these terrible things. He had to understand the minds that could create such tools of destruction and then carry them across the stars. He felt that what he learned would be even more frightening than what he had already discovered. The captain's cabin aboard Perseverance was small and simple. A narrow bed was built into one wall. A desk occupied the opposite corner, covered in personal items and a computer terminal. A single photograph hung above the bed, showing a group of humans standing together on what looked like a ship's bridge. Kitaran stood in the doorway, studying the room with the keen eyes of a scientist examining an artifact from a lost civilization. He had spent the last 2 days analyzing weapons and armor. Now he needed to understand the beings who had built them. The captain is named Sarah Chen, Illet reported, checking the personnel files they had recovered. She is 43 years old by human reckoning, with 17 years of service in their military. She has received numerous awards for valor in combat, before she was assigned command of this vessel. Kitaran approached the desk and picked up one of the personal items. It was a small metal object, round, with a ribbon attached. The surface was engraved with words and an image of a star. This is a medal, a symbol of recognition for exceptional work in combat. Illet checked the database. This specific medal is called the Silver Star. According to human records, it is awarded for gallantry in action against the enemy. Gallantry. Kitaran turned the medal in his hands. The Viori had no equivalent concept. Their military gave promotions for efficient service and punishments for failures. The idea of special recognition for bravery in battle seemed strange to him. He set the medal down and opened the computer terminal. The captain kept a personal log separate from the ship's official records. Most of it was encrypted, but some entries were accessible. The first entry he read was dated a few months before the battle that crippled the ship. Captain Chen wrote about the crew, describing the new officers who had recently joined and the veterans who had served with her for years. Her words were warm and personal, filled with clear affection for the people under her command. She cared for them, Kitaran noted. These are not the records of someone who views their crew as an expendable resource. Humans appear to form strong emotional bonds. Illet agreed. Their social structure is based on personal relationships, not hierarchical obligations. Kitaran browsed through other entries. He found records of training exercises, reports on technical maintenance, and daily observations about life on board the ship. Captain Chen wrote about meals shared with her officers, celebrations of crew members' birthdays, and quiet moments of contemplation during night watches. Then he reached the entry for the day of the battle. Contact with unidentified vessels, Chen wrote. 3 ships, unknown configuration. They appeared on our sensors without warning and immediately opened fire. No communication, no demands. They just attacked. The entry continued with clinical precision, describing the early moments of the engagement. Perseverance returned fire while attempting to establish communication with the attackers. When communication failed, Chen ordered all weapon systems to battle mode. "We are outnumbered and outplayed," she wrote. "The enemy has better speed, and their weapons are cutting through our outer armor. But we are not helpless. We will make them pay for every hit they land on us." Kitaran felt a chill reading those words. There was no fear in them, no consideration of surrender or retreat, only a cold determination to fight and inflict as much damage as possible. The next few entries were brief, written during pauses in the battle. Chen reported on casualties, damage to critical systems, and the gradual destruction of the enemy ships. Her tone remained steady even as the death toll among her crew rose. Lieutenant Park died at his post, read one entry. He refused to leave. Even when the fire reached his compartment, he kept firing until the smoke took him. I will recommend him for awards. Ensign Williams saved 3 crew members, sealing herself in a breached compartment. Explosive decompression killed her, but the others are alive. She was 22 years old. Chief Engineer Morrison kept the engines running despite third-degree burns on his back. The medics wanted to give him sedatives. He told them he would rest when the battle was over. Story after story about people enduring horrific injuries and keeping on fighting. Kitaran read about crew members who ignored broken bones to man their stations, who bandaged their own wounds instead of seeking medical treatment, who gave their lives to protect their comrades without hesitation. "This is not normal behavior," he said. "No species should be capable of functioning at this level of trauma." "I have found the medical records," Elliot replied. "They are enlightening." She transferred the data to Kitaran's terminal. What he saw there challenged his understanding of biology. The human body was incredibly resilient. They could survive injuries that would instantly kill a Viori. Their brains produced chemicals that suppressed pain and enhanced focus during times of extreme stress. They are built for this, Kitaran realized. Their bodies evolved to survive combat. It seems humans developed on a world with many predators and faced constant competition for resources. Those who could survive injury and keep fighting lived to reproduce. Those who could not, did not. Natural selection. The universe itself shaped humans into warriors, culling the weak over millions of years until only the survivors remained. Each living human was the descendant of countless generations of fighters, each of whom was tough enough to pass on their genes. Kitaran turned to the historical database that had been recovered from the ship's systems. He needed to understand how humans became what they were. The answer, he suspected, lay in their past. The database contained thousands of years of human history, and it was as horrific as he had feared. War, endless war, rooted in the dawn of their civilization. Humans fought for everything: territory, food, water, precious metals, religious beliefs, political ideologies. They invented ever more terrifying weapons. Each generation built upon the destruction of the previous. Kitaran read about conflicts with names like World War, a conflict that engulfed their entire planet and claimed tens of millions of lives. He learned about nuclear weapons, first developed to end one war, and then built in mass quantities for wars that never came. Then he found a concept that froze the blood in his veins. Mad mutually assured destruction, he read aloud. The documentation explained the term in dry, technical language. During a certain period of human history, 2 powerful nations built enough nuclear weapons to destroy each other completely, not just their armies, but their entire civilizations. Every city, every farm, every living being. And this threat of total destruction was considered a form of peace. They threatened to destroy themselves, Kitaran said slowly. Both sides knew that any war would mean extinction, and they lived with that threat for decades, building more and more weapons, ready to end their own species rather than accept defeat. Ellet's antennae were pressed against her skull. This is madness. No, Kitaran shook his head. It is logic taken to the extreme. If both sides possess the ability to destroy each other completely, neither side can afford to attack. The threat of mutual extinction ensures cooperation. But the risk. The humans took the risk. They lived with the realization that their civilization could end in fire at any moment, and they continued to build their weapons because they would rather risk extinction than accept dominance. He thought about what this meant for any species that might encounter humanity. Humans had already proven that they would rather die than surrender. They had proven it against each other again and again throughout their history. The database contained more horrors: chemical weapons that dissolved human flesh, biological weapons that turned the body against itself, psychological warfare designed to break the mind. Humans had explored every possible path of destruction, tested every method of killing their own kind, and they had survived it all. "Show me the population figures," Kitaran ordered. Ellet called up the data. Despite the wars, despite the famine, despite the plague and disasters, the human population had consistently grown. Over time, at the last recorded moment, there were approximately 12 billion humans spread across their home planet and numerous colonies. 12 billion survivors. 12 billion descendants of the toughest, most resilient, most determined fighters their world had produced. And this number was growing. "They reproduce quickly," Ellet noted. "Each generation is larger than the previous. Their colonies are expanding faster than any species in our records." Kitaran closed the database and leaned back in the captain's chair. He was beginning to understand the full scale of what the collective was facing. Humans were dangerous not just because of their weapons or their armor. They were dangerous because of what they were. A species forged in the fires of constant conflict, shaped by evolution and history into the ultimate survivors. They did not know how to surrender. They did not know how to accept defeat. They knew only how to fight and endure until their enemies were destroyed. He took the captain's log again and read the final entries. "Enemy ships destroyed," Chen wrote. "Total crew casualties 43%. Ship is heavily damaged, but we have won. Rescue ships are on the way. We will live to fight another day." She had lost nearly half her crew, and she considered it a victory. Perseverance was turned into burning wreckage, and she was already thinking of the next battle. The final entry was personal, written while waiting for the rescue ships. "I am thinking of the crew members we lost today. Good people, all of them. They deserved better than to die in the dark between the stars, fighting an enemy we don't even understand." But they didn't hesitate. When the attack came, they went to their stations and did their duty. They fought and died so that others could live. That is what we do. That is what humans have always done. We are not the strongest species in the universe. We are not the smartest or most advanced. But we are the ones who never give up. We are the ones who keep fighting when all hope is lost. We are the ones who would rather die free than live as slaves. If anyone ever reads this, know this: the crew of Perseverance died with honor. They met their enemy without fear, and they made those bastards pay for every one of us they killed. That is our way. It has always been our way, and it always will be. Kitaran set the log aside and sat in silence for a long time. He had wanted to understand humans, and now he did. He understood them better than he had ever wanted to. They were not monsters, they were not mindless killers. They were simply a species forged in fire so hot that it burned away everything except the ability to survive. They loved their families, they cared for their friends, they created art, music, and literature. But upon threat, all of that fell away, and what remained was a creature that would fight to the death against any enemy. "Senior Analyst," Ellet said quietly, "what will we tell the collective?" Kitaran thought about the comfortable, peaceful civilization he had left behind. The Viori, who had never faced a real threat, who believed that reasonable discussion could solve any problem, who assumed that all species eventually wanted the same thing. "We will tell them to be afraid," he said finally. "We will tell them to be very, very afraid. And we will tell them that no matter what happens, we must never give humans a reason to see us as the enemy. Because if they do, they will not stop until one of us is destroyed." And looking at their history, looking at their weapons, looking at what they were willing to endure, he looked at the photograph above the bed, at the smiling faces of the crew who had served and died aboard this ship. "I am not sure we will be the ones left standing." He stood up and walked to the door. There was one more analysis to complete, one more report to prepare. Then he would send his findings to the collective and hope the leaders there understood the warning he was trying to give them. Humans were coming. They were spreading through the galaxy, building their brutal ships and their terrible cannons. And the only way to survive their arrival was to ensure they never had a reason to use that weaponry against you. Because once they started fighting, they never stopped. The captain's log made that very clear. Humans would rather die free than live as slaves, and they had the weapons to take their enemies with them. The Grand Council chamber of the Viori Collective was a magnificent space, built 10,000 years ago at the peak of their civilization's power. Crystal walls towered to a domed ceiling that displayed the stars in perfect detail. Representatives from 100-member species sat in tiered rows. Their bodies and forms were as diverse as the worlds they called home. Senior Analyst Kitaran stood on the speaker's podium in the center of the hall, feeling very small under the weight of so many watching eyes. He had spent 3 weeks traveling from the edge of known space to reach this place. 3 weeks of preparing his report, organizing his evidence, rehearsing his words. "Now is the moment," he began. His voice was amplified to fill the vast space. "Respected representatives, I stand before you with information that I believe represents the most significant discovery in the history of the collective information about a species that has recently entered our region of space, a species called humans." A rustle passed through the rows of assembled delegates. Most of them had heard of humans. They were the subject of mild curiosity. A primitive species that had stumbled upon faster-than-light travel and was now exploring the galaxy with the enthusiasm of children discovering a new playground. "I have spent the last month analyzing a human ship that was discovered on the edge of known space," Kitaran continued. "A ship called Perseverance, classified by humans as a light cruiser, a small vessel by their standards." He activated a holographic display, and an image of the human ship appeared above the council hall. Several delegates made sounds of surprise or mockery at the sight of its crude, angular design. "Before I share my findings, I must ask the council to set aside your assumptions about this species. What I am about to show you will challenge everything we believe about war, survival, and the nature of intelligent life in the universe." The display shifted to show a cross-section of the ship's hull. Kitaran began to explain the multi-layered armor system, describing each level of protection and its purpose. As he spoke, the sounds of mockery died down and were replaced by a growing silence. "This ship was designed to absorb damage that would destroy any vessel in the collective fleet," Kitaran said. "It was built to be struck hundreds of times and keep fighting. Humans do not rely on shields or evasion. They simply endure." He moved on to the weapon systems. Kinetic launchers capable of striking targets at distances that made energy weapons useless. Missiles carrying payloads of conventional explosives, nuclear warheads, and antimatter. The sheer volume of destructive power that one small ship carried. "Perseverance possessed the capability to destroy a battle group of our best ships," Kitaran stated flatly. "And according to our intelligence, humans have hundreds of such ships, perhaps thousands." The hall became very quiet. Delegates who had been mocking the primitive design were no longer laughing. They looked at the holographic display with expressions of growing alarm. "But weapons and armor are not what make humans truly dangerous," Kitaran continued. "What makes them dangerous is what they are, their nature, their history, their absolute refusal to surrender." He changed the display again, this time showing historical data from the ship's database. Wars spanning thousands of years, death tolls that made the delegates gasp. Weapons of destruction that were created, used, and improved generation after generation. "Humans have been at war with themselves since they developed writing," Kitaran explained. "They fought for territory, resources, beliefs, and ideas. They killed hundreds of millions of their own species, and through it all they survived. They became stronger." He showed them the concept of mutually assured destruction, the nuclear standoff that had defined an entire era of human history. The willingness to risk total extinction rather than accept defeat. "They built weapons capable of destroying their own civilization," Kitaran said. "Not to use against aliens, not to fight external threats, but to use against each other. And they kept these weapons ready for decades, ready to end their own species rather than let their enemies win." The silence in the hall was absolute. Now, even those delegates who had seemed most skeptical were watching with growing horror. "Think about what this means," Kitaran continued. "For thousands of years, humans have been at war with an enemy just as intelligent, just as adaptable, and just as determined as they themselves are. Every weapon they build, every tactic they develop, every ship they design, is tested against the most dangerous opponent they could possibly encounter, their own kind." He paused to let that take root. "We have always believed that our way of war was superior, fast, clean, efficient, minimal losses, quick resolutions. We looked down upon species that fought brutal wars of attrition, considering them primitive and wasteful. But I have come to realize that we were not superior. We were simply lucky. Lucky that we have faced enemies who shared our philosophy. Lucky that we have never faced a species that views war as humans do. He changed the display for the last time, showing the crew logs from Perseverance. Stories of humans fighting through injuries that would have killed any Viori. The final entry of Captain Chen, announcing her determination to fight to the end. They never give up, Kitaran said. They never surrender. They would rather die than accept defeat. And they have the weapons, the determination, and the sheer physical resilience to fight until the very end. He stepped back from the podium and looked at the assembled delegates directly. My recommendation to this council is simple. Do not provoke humans. Do not threaten them. Do not give them any reason to see the collective as an enemy. Because if they do, he thought of the antimatter vault, the nuclear missiles, the kinetic launchers that could shatter moons. If they do, they will not stop until one of us is destroyed. And based on everything I have seen, I am not sure we will be the ones left standing. The hall erupted in noise. Delegates shouted questions, demanding more information, expressing disbelief or fear. The moderator struggled to restore order. His calls for silence were lost in the chaos. Finally, the senior delegate from the Tolari rose from his seat. The Tolari were an ancient species, almost as old as the Viori themselves. Their representative was a towering figure with scales the color of polished copper, and when he spoke, the hall gradually fell silent. "Senior Analyst Kitaran," he said in a deep, rumbling voice, "you paint a frightening picture of this human species, but I must ask you this. Are they truly so different from other aggressive species we have encountered? Are they truly more dangerous than the Kai or the Zulvan, or any other warlike race we have dealt with in the past?" Kitaran thought about the question carefully before answering. "Respected delegate, the species you mention are indeed aggressive. They value combat and martial skill, but they fight for specific goals: territory, resources, honor. When those goals are achieved or become impossible, they negotiate, they make peace. Humans are different. They do not fight for specific goals. They fight because it is their nature. They fight because they have been at war for so long that they no longer know how to stop. And when they face an enemy, they do not seek victory. They seek destruction, the complete, total annihilation of their opponent. Look at their weapons," he continued. "Look at the antimatter bombs, the nuclear missiles, the kinetic projectiles that can crack planets. These are not weapons of conquest. These are weapons of extermination, built by a species that would rather destroy everything than accept defeat." The Tolari delegate was silent for a long time. Then he nodded slowly and sat back down. Other questions followed. How many human ships existed? Where were their colonies located? What were their political structures? Kitaran answered as best he could, relying on the data recovered from Perseverance. Humans had dozens of colonial worlds scattered across several star systems. Their population was growing rapidly, doubling every few generations. They had several governments, sometimes cooperating, sometimes competing, but all of them maintained powerful military forces. "They are expanding rapidly," Kitaran reported. "At their current level of growth, they will reach collective space within the next 50 years, perhaps sooner if they develop improved faster-than-light technology. Then we must act now," announced the delegate from the Myran Confederation, a small insectoid creature with shimmering blue wings. "We must contain them before they become too powerful. A preemptive strike, while they are still weak." The proposal caused a wave of murmurs through the hall. Several delegates seemed to be considering the idea. Kitaran felt a coldness run through his body. "Respected delegate," he said carefully, "I must strongly advise against any military action. A preemptive strike would give humans exactly what they need, a common enemy. Something to unite their various factions. Something to fight against. They would not win against the combined forces of the collective," insisted Delegate Myran. "Our fleet is much larger than theirs at the moment," Kitaran agreed. "But consider what happens if we attack them. We will kill some of them. Yes, perhaps many of them, but we will not kill all of them. Someone will survive, and those survivors will dedicate every resource, every ship, every weapon, to destroying us in return." He thought of the final log entry from Captain Chen. The crew of Perseverance died with honor. They met their enemy without fear, and they made those bastards pay for every one of us they killed. "They will come for us," he continued. "They will build more ships, more weapons, more armies. They will fight us for years, decades, generations if necessary. They will accept any loss, make any sacrifice, to ensure our destruction. Because that is what they do. That is what they have always done. We could win such a war, but we would pay a terrible price. And even if we won, even if we destroyed every human ship and burned every human world, some of them would survive somewhere, hidden in the darkness between the stars. The humans would remain, and they would never forgive us. They would never stop hunting us. The hall fell silent again. The delegates were beginning to understand what Kitaran had realized weeks ago while standing in the armory of Perseverance. "So what do you suggest?" asked the Talari delegate finally. "If we cannot fight them and cannot contain them, what can we do?" Kitaran took a deep breath. "We will make peace with them. We will establish contact openly and honestly. We will trade with them, cooperate with them, welcome them into the galactic community. We will make ourselves their allies, because if we cannot be their enemies, we must be their friends. And perhaps, over time, we can teach them that there are other ways to solve problems than violence. Perhaps we can show them that the galaxy does not have to be a battlefield." "And if that fails?" demanded Delegate Myron. "Then we will pray," Kitaran replied quietly. "We will pray that when humans finally turn their weapons against us, we will be able to hold out long enough to negotiate a surrender, because fighting them to the end is not an option. They are better at it than we are. They always have been." The council argued for hours. Some delegates argued for immediate military preparation. Others called for isolation to hide from humans and hoped they would go somewhere else. But in the end, most sided with Kitaran's recommendation. A resolution was passed just before the dawn of the next day. The Viori Collective would seek peaceful contact with the human species. Diplomatic missions would be prepared. Trade agreements would be drafted. Every effort would be made to welcome humans as partners rather than treat them as threats. As the delegates filed out of the hall, exhausted and anxious, Kitaran remained on the speaker's podium. He watched them leave, wondering if any of them truly understood what was coming. Humans were different. They were something the galaxy had never seen before, a species forged in fire, hardened by millennia of war, carrying weapons that could destroy worlds. They were coming, spreading through the stars like a tide that could not be stopped. And all the peaceful, civilized species of the collective could do was hope that the tide would wash over them, not drown them. Kitaran thought of the photograph in Captain Chen's cabin, the smiling faces, the easy camaraderie. Humans were not monsters. They were people with families, friends, and dreams. They laughed, they loved, and they created beautiful things. But they were also killers, the most effective killers the universe had ever produced. And if the collective ever forgot that, even for a moment, the consequences would be catastrophic. He gathered his notes and left the council hall. Outside, the sun was rising over the capital city, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. It was beautiful, peaceful, serene. Somewhere out there, among the distant stars, humans were building more ships, training more soldiers, developing more weapons. They had no idea the galaxy had just learned to fear them. They were simply doing what they had always done, what their nature demanded, preparing for war, because that was what humans did. That was what they had always done, and that was what they would always do until the end of time. Kitaran stepped into the morning light and allowed himself a single moment of hope. Perhaps peace was possible. Perhaps humans could change. Perhaps the galaxy could find a way to live with this dangerous new species. But deep in his heart, he knew the truth. Humans would never change. They could not change. They were what their history and their evolution had made them. And the galaxy would simply have to learn to live with that, or wither away. The stars continued to burn overhead, indifferent to the small creatures moving beneath them. And somewhere on the small blue world called Earth, a child was being born, a new human, inheriting the legacy of countless generations of survivors. Another warrior for a species that had never known anything else. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Humans were coming, and the galaxy would never be the same.